For most motorcycle racers, MotoGP is just a pipe dream, something that 99.9% of the world's population will never get to experience. And even then, winning a race is something beyond that. Fighting against the world's best riders and coming out on top of all of them, even for just a day, is a Herculean task that many of us will never understand the true value of. For some, that single win is a career-defining moment. But for the greatest, a single win is just another drop in the pond. Just another check mark and another number to add to their incredible legacy that inspires generations of motorcycle riders to come. But sometimes a win can symbolize more than a win. Whether it's an iconic battle or something that you do through incredibly adverse conditions, a win can be talked about for years. In fact, when talking about a rider, there's one win that they all have in common. One win that seemed trivial at the time, and that they'll never understand the true scope of until later. Their last win. A rider's last win is funny. It could happen anytime on any given weekend, and they'll never know if that was truly it until their career comes to a close. To highlight this, let's take a look at the rider who many people consider the greatest of all time, Valentino Rossi. The Doctor won 115 Grands Prix throughout his career, a mark that leaves him behind just one other man in all of history, and he did it across the longest span ever. He won his first Grand Prix on the 18th of August 1996, and 20 years and 313 days later, he would win his last at the Dutch TT in 2017. Now, this race is widely considered to be one of the best of all time by both riders and fans. For the first half of the race, Petrucci, Marquez, Zarco, and Rossi would fight out for the lead. However, just as Rossi would begin to pull away, rain would start to fall in the Netherlands. Petrucci and Dovizioso would close in fast, following Rossi's slow and meticulous path through the wet spots at a much higher speed. And for the last 7 laps, Petrucci and Rossi would battle for the lead. Initially, Rossi would put on a defensive clinic, keeping Petrucci behind him, until he finally found a way through, with just 4 laps left. And even then, he couldn't hold it. Rossi would make his iconic move through the final chicane, and, with 4 laps left, he would never look back, keeping Petrucci behind him all the way to the finish line, taking his 115th Grand Prix win, and his last. After the race, Rossi celebrated hard. He takes a long victory lap, saying hi to everyone around the sides of the track. Flags bearing the number 46 waved through a cloud of neon yellow smoke over crowds of adoring fans. It really doesn't feel like anyone thought this would be his last win. Rossi at the time seemed to be just a permanent staple of MotoGP. He had been racing at an incredibly high level for 20 years at this point, and it really felt like he would just never leave. The commentators specifically say it never makes sense to count Rossi out, and it really didn't feel like this was his last one. He would race for another 5 years, but he would never again cross the finish line in P1. Let's move from a rider whose career slowly fizzled out to a rider who unfortunately had his career cut short by injury. We're taking a trip back to the end of the 500cc era to talk about Mick Doohan. Doohan was borderline unbeatable during his championship runs. From 95 to 98, he won 62% of all of his races. And as the years went on, he only seemed to get further from his competition. 1997 was the most dominant year of his career, and 98 wasn't far off it, and he would secure his final world championship with 1 race left on the calendar. A commonly forgotten fact is that Doohan had actually announced that he was going to retire at the end of 1999, regardless of how things turned out. Some of his competitors didn't believe this, claiming Doohan would only step down once he had been beaten. But sadly, in the end we would never find out the truth. Doohan's last win would come in the final round of the 1998 season. Doohan was untouchable in Argentina, winning the race by 4 seconds and never once feeling like he was in any danger of not finishing P1. This was his 4th consecutive win in a season where no one else could have been the champion but him. He was one of the greatest to ever do it, no question, and all signs pointed for him going for 6 in a row. But sadly, an accident in practice in Jerez the following year would leave Doohan's legs badly injured, and he would be forced to announce his immediate retirement from the sport. In a sport as dangerous as MotoGP, cases like Doohan's aren't that uncommon. Just 6 years before the Australian legend was forced to retire early, another superstar was put in the exact same position. American Wayne Rainey looked like he could make a run at being the greatest of all time. Rainey had never finished a Premier Class championship lower than third in the points, and in just his 5th year, he had secured his championship three-peat. He rode with such skill on the track and was so unbeatable that it seemed like no one else could be champion but him in '94. Well, not if Kevin Schwantz had anything to say about it. Schwantz would take the fight to Rainey, and they would trade podiums and wins all season long. It truly was a fantastic race for the championship. Rainey just barely had the edge heading into the final few rounds. In Brno, it was a one-man show. Rainey would qualify on pole for the first time in over a year. At the start of the race, Rainey and Luca Cadalora would pull away from the rest of the riders. And after just a short while, Rainey would pull away from Cadalora as well, eventually finishing 7 seconds ahead of the Italian rider. Rainey disappeared into the distance that day, and it really just seemed to show that he was the best in the world. He was at the peak of his powers, and fans could be witnessing the rise of the next greatest rider in MotoGP history. Unfortunately, this race would be the last time he would ever be able to show that potential. At the next round, an accident in practice would leave Rainey wheelchair-bound, forcing him to retire from the sport immediately, and prematurely ending one of the greatest careers the sport had ever seen. Let's move away from the sad stuff. Not all last wins have tragic endings, but it seems like they're never meant to be glorious affairs. It's like the racing gods want you to glaze over that last win, and then come back later to see the final moment of that rider's glory. This next one is a perfect example. Casey Stoner had about as perfect of a send-off to his career as he possibly could have had, but he still managed to be overshadowed that day. Stoner announced his retirement early in 2012, while he was the defending champion. This came as a shock to fans, as Stoner was one of the best riders in the world and seemed to be in a position to compete with the other legends for years to come. But the Australian had grown tired of the drama and the media circus that was MotoGP, and he announced that 2012 would be his final year in the racing series. He was ready to move on, but that didn't mean he was just going to lie down. He was going to fight until the lights went out. Stoner didn't have a career year by his standards, and a nasty crash in Indianapolis would take him out of championship contention. But if Stoner still had one thing on his MotoGP bucket list, it was one last win at home. Stoner hadn't lost a race at Phillip Island since 2006, and he didn't plan on starting now. The Australian superstar was poetry in motion at his home race, leading from start to finish and never looking like he was in any danger. He put on a masterclass that showed just how great a rider at his home track could truly be, and he used his incredible skills to pull off one final, amazing victory at home, just ahead of Jorge Lorenzo. Stoner has secured victory in his second to last race ever, and while it wasn't guaranteed to be his last win, it was about as close as you could get. Commentators make mention that Stoner will be missed, and Stoner's putting on a final performance at home. All sort of things that are tangential to saying Stoner won his final race, but never wanting to count him out from winning the next weekend at Valencia. Regardless, this win was overshadowed by another event at the track that day. Lorenzo had secured the World Championship with his second place finish after Dani Pedrosa crashed out of the race. And of course, a championship win trumps a single Grand Prix win. So it does make sense. It's just unfortunate that Stoner had this moment sort of overshadowed. Now, I said nobody knows that they've won their last race when it happens. That's not quite true. There's one man who undeniably, categorically knew that he had won his final MotoGP race. That man was Troy Bayliss. Bayliss was a World Superbike champion who decided to try his hand at MotoGP, and he failed miserably, having 3 terrible years, 2 with Ducati, 1 with Honda, before taking the boat back to World Superbike and immediately becoming world champion again. With Ducati's Sete Gibernau out for the final race, they invited him to come and participate. One last ride with the bike that he had helped develop. Of course, Valencia 2006 was dominated by discourse of a different kind. Valentino Rossi versus the Kentucky kid, Nicky Hayden. Rossi going for his 6th consecutive Premier Class title, and Hayden looking to become the first ever MotoGP champion, not named Valentino Rossi. While massive drama would unfold in the opening laps regarding this championship fight, that's not what we're here to talk about today. Troy Bayliss was on a mission of his own, pulling away from the field on the very first lap, and despite being reeled in by Nicky Hayden and Loris Capirossi, he would never relinquish P1. He would cruise to his maiden victory, his only victory, a glorious return to a sport where he'd never found much success. And he proved that World Superbike riders maybe weren't as low on the totem pole as many fans seemed to think at the time. And he did it all in front of Michael Jordan. That's not really relevant, I just wanted to include that because I somehow forget that Jordan's at this race every time, and then I watch it and I'm like, oh. Anyway, that's the NBA fan in me coming out. Bayless had done it, coming in as a wildcard rider and managing to win the race. Reflecting on the win, Bayless stayed humble, placing more emphasis on being able to secure a Ducati 1-2 with Capirossi, as those two had been the first riders to ride the Desmos Adige for MotoGP. He placed more emphasis on this than his own win, saying that he was just happy for Ducati and the program as a whole. At the end of the day, a last win is a major moment in a rider's career, one that fans and riders often don't know has happened in the moment. It's the race where they set their all-time win total, where they show the peak of their powers one final time, and sometimes where miracles happen. What I want you to take away from this video is you never know when a rider's last win might come. We may have already seen the last wins of many of the current riders on the grid today. So next time your favorite wins a race, never take it for granted. Thank you all so much for watching. As per usual, feel free to like and subscribe. YouTube says that 125% of my viewers are subscribed, so if you're not subscribed, then man, you're kind of weird. 125%? You're not one of them? I don't know, man. I'd subscribe. I wouldn't want to be you. Jokes aside, it means a lot that you all watch my content. Drop a like, comment, interact with it. Tell me what you want to see from me. Tell me what you thought. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't really have anything to say, except for have a fantastic day. Oh shit, that rhymed.